Since 1959, Cuba has faced different plans designed to destroy the revolution. Havana has revealed these plans and also has been saying that are conceived in United States. But in the last year, the news agency Associated Press has demonstrated that these intentions are not in the past. Raúl Capote knows this very well. He's a published writer and a professor. He used to be a CIA agent, but a few years ago he went public and everybody knew that actually he was working for the Cuban government. So you have a very interesting story, Raúl, and I think a lot of people don't know it. How's that you were like a double agent, that you worked for the CIA and also for the Cuban Secret Services?
I worked for the U.S. Special Services. I was CIA agent Pablo. I was specialized on ideological subversive work in culture, but in fact I was agent Daniel of the Cuban State Security.
So when did you become public?
In 2011, there was the need for an open denunciation given a set of actions by the CIA taking place in the country related to areas around which I was working: the cultural warfare, ideological political subversion, in education and culture. And I was asked to appear on a series of programs called Cuba's Reason, where I explained who I really was and what the CIA was planning to do regarding the youth sector.
I would like to know more, Capote. Let's go and talk a little bit more, because I think that you have a lot of experience that you could share with us. So, Capote, I've been wondering for a long time when I read all this news about Zunzuneo and Piramideo. I live here in Cuba, and I did not know about this until the Associated Press made this big announcement. Were they effective in any way?
The aim of Zunzuneo was that of creating a social network to allow a high mobilization at wide social levels. That is why at first there was confused people, since all this came disguised as cultural and sports news. And at first there were sectors in which it was well accepted, since it gave the possibility to access to that type of information. But after the denunciation by the AP about the real motive for his social network, of that Cuban Twitter they were trying to create, its effectiveness was nil. When it was known, it really was a plan aimed at subverting the internal order in Cuba. Immediately, any type of effect within the Cuban population disappeared.
I understood that this Zunzuneo and the announcement of AP created a debate inside the United States because of the money that the USAID had dedicated to this kind of program without telling the Congress. Is that correct?
What is being disclosed is an old program by the U.S. Special Services regarding Cuba. USAID has been involved for quite a long time in plans to subvert internal order in Cuba. The fact that a press agent as that, which have disclosed this information...
Why do you think AP did this?
Well, AP has already been accused within the U.S. There has been a debate about the fact that the AP was using secret data, which caused a debate within the U.S. Senate and Congress related to the type of espionage the U.S. government was carrying on the press against journalists, and the AP had a very positive stand regarding that type of denunciation, that type of work. So I think the AP considered it was interesting within the present level of the relations between two countries to disclose such information that belongs to an old stage of the relations between the two countries. Actions that have nothing to do with what is expected to happen between the USA and Cuba, and with the famous idea expressed by the US President of a new beginning in the relations between Cuba.
Is this the new beginning?
In fact, there has not been a real beginning, since the U.S. policy has remained unchanged. In fact, we are in the midst of a rather strong financial war. A characteristic of the economic was by the Obama administration.
The blockade, you mean?
The issue of the blockade against the country's finance, where it might have some effect and plans have continued. The U.S. aid is still used as the facade for these types of actions, and a debate has been promoted after the exposing of said information by the news agency. But the debate has been mainly focused on the new policy that should be implemented, and that it is about time to put aside that type of actions, of strategies against Cuba, which up to now has yielded no results. We are talking about 10 U.S. administrations that have been using the same tool, stressing.
Why do they keep using this kind of tool?
Bear in mind that the cover plans designed at the beginning of the Cuban Revolution in the 60s, a very old one, envisage similar actions to the one we are witnessing at present. Nothing new. The idea of creating an internal opposition to overthrow the revolution is a project as old as the emergence of the revolution itself, which has failed once again. But there is a group of Cuban-American congressmen that have created a very strong lobby with strong economic and political interests, defending against all odds this policy.
In the last years, it seems, Raúl, that the young population, the young people here in Cuba are like their target audience in this kind of programs. Recently, we heard about a program to bring young people to the universities here in Cuba and try to find leaders that could have some kind of subversive against the government behavior. Why young people, young generations?
The plan was always aimed at creating an opposition in the country, and this is acknowledged in the declassified documents of the U.S. government. There has never been an opposition in the country. Years have passed by, and they're struggling against time. They are in a hurry. They are worried regarding what might happen, what is really already happening. There is a generation change. A new generation is taking leading positions in the leadership of the country, in the government, in different spheres of the economy, and they have no position to confront to this new historical situation.
You say that they don't have an opposition. Internationally, you can see some faces like Ladies in White, Joanny Sanchez, and other figures, people that seems like an opposition with some kind of capital, political capital. Is that true? Do they have that?
There is no political capital. They are simply media creations. They are created to be exposed abroad, but inside the country it has no social basis. That is what is making them hurry. They are battling against time. They are aware of the fact that in a few years there will be a new leadership in the country. There will be a young leadership, a leadership with different characteristics, and they don't have a position to face this change. They are trying to find youth with social prestige, youth coming from sectors which might be in the future the real opposition to the revolution. They dig inside alternative groups. They explore, do research within the university sector. They try to train leaders. That is the reason for the creation of so many scholarships plans that have tried to implement in recent years with the Genesis project.
You know a lot about this.
The Genesis project was something dear to me, since it was one of the tasks I had to fulfill in my capacity as CIA agent.
Like a CIA agent.
It was aimed at training within the university sector leaders for the change in the future of the country. Genesis failed after the denunciation made in 2011. With my participation, the project to train university leaders, youth leaders, collapsed. And they looked for a new way in order to create and train this new leadership. Not only through a scholarship plan, but also using any other way possible, even with a direct participation in the country. And that's how the idea of the travelers appeared. This idea dates back to 2009, even when the Genesis project was working, since Genesis is a long-term plan.
Empiezan a hablar de enviar a Cuba a jóvenes de diferentes regiones de América Latina.
That of identifying and training young Latin Americans that could set the ground. First, to identify the economic sector. Freelancers, agricultural cooperative students, informal groups looking for people having leadership conditions. They didn't need to be openly against the revolution, or they should not feel frustrated with what they were doing. But rather, they should be people with personal ambitions, with personal projections, so that they could be trained. And they start creating required conditions. I do recall that in 2009, a group of very young Costa Rican university students arrived in the country, poorly trained with a rather distorted vision of Cuba. They were looking for musical groups within the cultural sector, trying to identify possible leaders. So things that seemed rather absurd given the Cuban conditions took place. For example, sending people to Cuba with manuals in digital format or in hard copy to subvert the order, with financing from the USA to circulate them in Havana University without any type of previous training. I used to joke when they told about this plan to help being a CIA agent in the development of this plan. I told them, imagine a Costa Rican, a Venezuelan, a Guatemalan, a Salvadorian young student standing on the main stairs of the Havana University trying to socialize with Cuban students, trying to hand them pen drive at random among Cuban students, telling them that they will give one pen drive and $5 and this student, if you accept to continue distributing pen drive and money, which might turn to be a very profitable business. I told them, you know what will happen? The student will take the pen drive and the US dollars and the $5 will go to the nearest computer and will format the pen drive, eliminating the manual, and will invite his or her lover to a beer, and that will be the final destination of such a crazy project. They tried to implement this project, and the result was exactly that. There was no replication of manuals, pen drive disappeared, and they never obtained the desired result.
Money spent in something that did not work in any way.
Money from the U.S. taxpayers used in projects without any possibility of success.
I have a question that, and you know about this, because this circumstance in which you know from the inside all this, and like Cuban revolutionary young intellectual, we could think that United States have the most powerful ways to destroy another government, like the secret services and their army, but they continuously fail when they try to plan something towards Cuba, towards the destroyment of the revolution. Why do you think they fail all the time, again and again, and continues spending money in something that does not work?
First of all, they don't really know the country, and it might seem something absurd to say that since we are referring to
90 miles away,
to a big power that have been monitoring everything happening in the country, with the help of millions of dollars and analysts compiling information about Cuba. So it seems illogical not to have a real knowledge of the country, and quite often they get confused with what they would like to achieve and the real facts. They don't know the Cuban youth, the Cuban nature, the idiosyncrasy of Cubans. They have always misread the inconformity existing in the country with levels of opposition in the country. The opposition they have tried to create has never had a social basis in the country, not based in the social reality of the country. It has not been based on what is really happening, on real issues. Many actions undertaken are planned based on information without a real foundation. And this lack of real basis makes them fail time and again. They have always based their analysis on the Cuban youth on the level of inconformity the youth might have regarding the future. But then, what is the alternative they are offering to the youth? What type of future we are referring to? They quite often made the mistake of basing their analysis on the experience they had in Eastern Europe. Conditions are quite different. For example, on Eastern Europe, the issue of nationalism served their purposes. The anti-Russian, it was a favorable element to overthrow socialism. In Poland, the Solidarity Trade Union, nationalism was a favorable element to overthrow socialism. But when you use nationalism in Cuba, it is deeply rooted in revolutionary radicalism, in the struggle against annexing plans, and these are the principles well defined in the Cuban idiosyncrasy and culture. So using nationalism in Cuba is a mistake. It has never functioned. Although they have tried to hide the empire's hand in this type of project, to irrationally engage at plain sight in these actions that led them to failure. Many of those coming to do this work in Cuba, and I had the opportunity of meeting some of them, CIA officers, well-trained people with a sound experience in Eastern Europe. I met some with 10 or 12 years experience in countries such as Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, successful people coming to Cuba, but they won't last in Cuba. They were not able to really understand what was happening in Cuba. In 2008, there was a serious crisis with transportation in Cuba. They requested me to draw an analysis, a case study on the general opinion by Cubans. Information was compiled from everywhere. It was assessed, and it seems that a revolt will take place next day. They based all their analysis on these facts, and they prepared actions to feed the flames of this fire that will bring the revolution to its end. But to their surprise, days went by and nothing happened. The famous social burst didn't take place. They experienced the same regarding universities. They identified students. They tried to mobilize, foster their activities, especially mobilizing them. They told the students, you should start protesting on the lack of toothpaste. We will take from there and we will create a media issue, but this didn't work either. So it was one failure after the other. They misread a normal activity on the occasion of the Day of Students in any Cuban university, a day of joy, of celebration. I attended in Havana University to a play performance as part of, and we watched a play. And as part of the play, the leading actress shouted freedom on the Clytemnestra play. And the Costa Rican CIA official was really impressed because he considered the students were challenging university officials. They attend a culinary exhibit. Each school will present a food plate. Some students brought a plate with the lunch served that same day at the university dining hall. By the way, it was really lousy, water beans, and they considered this as an example of the success of my work. After that, we went to watch singers performing at Plaza Agramonte, and the singers performed songs criticizing university officials. Again, the CIA took this as an example of the success of my work. It was difficult for them to understand that all this was everyday issues in the university. The CIA was not able to create a front that will forge the real movement within the university against the revolution.
In some moment, were you afraid in some point that probably something that you would do would be effective in a way against Cuba?
Sí, por supuesto.
Yes, of course. It was a permanent concern on my part. I have been asked in previous occasions about the worst moment I have ever experienced. My greatest fear derived from the huge responsibility I was facing. Any misjudgment on my part as part of the work I was doing for the Cuban security forces, I need to have a level of effective work, results with the CIA, and my any mistake that might not really appreciate at the real time with the seriousness of the camp, it might have real consequence in what might happen in my area of influence. I had the responsibility to produce real information on what was happening in Cuba. Perhaps the CIA was planning an action against Cuba and I might not evaluate this in full length. Or perhaps something might happen within the university and I might not really appreciate its magnitude. I was working under a great stress, with huge responsibility, and this could lead me to making a mistake.
And in some point, Capote, when now that you're like seeing all this from the outside, and probably clearly, because in the middle of all this it was a little bit difficult, there's a perception that in the United States that the hostility it's been from Cuba to the United States and not from United States to Cuba. Do you think this all this that the AP, the Associated Press has been saying, proves that the plans exist from United States to Cuba? Do you think that in these conditions, after knowing this, the normalization of the relations will be possible?
I do believe this is possible. There is a historic need to improve relations. I am not referring about the existence of a plan by a given president, by a given administration, or a group. I think this is a historic issue. We are facing a historic time in which these relations should be improved. It won't be a fast change. It will take time to reestablish relations. Many things should be solved along the way. But I do believe we are in the right track to do things in a much better position than in the last 50 years. There are positive forces in the U.S., people who honestly want to improve these neighbor relations. There are strong cultural ties between these two neighboring countries. There are those wishing this to take place since they consider it is the best way to end with the revolution. It's easier to implement subversion actions with a normal relations scenery. It will be an easy work for special services. I met some CIA officials who believe it so, and they were trying to pave the way for this to take place.
Is Cuba prepared for this kind of a scenario?
Cuba is facing a very courageous process. The Cuban Revolution dared to undertake much needed changes. at a very difficult international economic time, also difficult for the domestic economy in the country. From the human, psychological point of view, the country is ready for this situation. But many more things are required in the economic field, even in the political one, to favor this without relinquishing to issues Cuba has been upholding forever, and for this relation to be based on mutual respect. Both the Cuban and the U.S. people wish so, and we could not allow a group of people stagnated in time to continue ruling relations between these two countries, which at the end are more than neighbors.
Thank you very much, Cabode. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.